or make reference to the Bible in some of your poems. You had a religious upbringing? Or at least I get that impression.
Yeah, I was born in an Orthodox home, and it was very hard for me. Because,
an Orthodox Jewish home.
Yes, I'm sorry, Orthodox Jewish. And it was very hard for me because I think I had doubts from early childhood, not about spirituality, but about the rules. I always had doubts about rules. I mean, that was maybe that's why I became a poet. Maybe that's true. So that was, but I always had a kind of love for spirituality. And you mentioned Eastern religion, and I think I've really been influenced by Eastern philosophy and religion. When I was about 11, I had a really mad crush about Marlon Brando, and I had read somewhere that he did yoga. So I started doing yoga.
So that's what introduced you to your Eastern interests.
And it just sort of compounded through the years.
But your Orthodox Jewish background does seep into your poetry.
Yes.
In the subject matter, in the biblical references. One of the poems that I was particularly taken with is Betrothal at the Well. And I wonder if you'd read that and maybe speak a little bit about it.
That's a pretty recent poem.
What section of Not To is that from?
I think the N-O-T-T-O, yes. N-O-T-T-O.
So the prohibitive collection, yeah.
And it sort of also brings things together. I guess that's what poems do for me. They really bring things together. But I'm thinking of all the places in the Bible where somebody comes to find a wife, and it isn't always the husband. Sometimes it's a manservant. But all the times it happens over and over again, and it's usually at a well. I guess thinking wellspring of life. Betrothal at the well. At a well, a maiden, Na'ara, is drawing water. A stranger arrives. He is footsore, weary. The maiden, hospitable, invites him home. The stranger has run away. He has been driven away. He has come to seek his fortune. He has come for her. This she knows and doesn't know. She hopes. It is why she is so often at the well. The water is her future. Her brother welcomes him. Come in, O blessed of the Lord. Examines the stranger's gifts, nose ring and bracelets that already attach the maiden to him. Not surprisingly, the stranger asks for the maiden's hand. Maybe not for himself. Maybe he is a servant. His master has sent him. If so, she has wasted that first look with her heart. Could it be otherwise? Behold, a manservant, in spite of his thirst, a cipher only meant to hold the place. The covenant depends on it.
So, holding the place, and the covenant depends, what does the covenant depend on the substitution?
Well, it depends on having the right birth line, for the chosen people. And I think the covenant depends on it. The words sort of suggested themselves to me, too. Sometimes you don't know where words are coming from. I mean, you have this sense of, how did that arrive? What does it mean? And yet there's a connection.
Yeah, I feel like I'm doing violence to your poetry, asking you to explain it, because it is so crystalline in a way, so clear, but not clear in the way that you can say this is what it means. So when I'm asking you to explain it, it's not really explicable, it's the poem.
Yeah,
but
it
here,
makes itself.
This notion of holding the place is so evocative to me, the idea of substituting for someone else. It could have to do with a whole series of relationships one has in life. And waiting for something, or but the idea of wasting that first, what is it, glance or
With your
look,
heart.
yeah, is very poignant.
I think it happens over and over again in the Bible, not just among couples, but Esau and Jacob and other Bible stories. And it happens in folklore, it happens in fairy tales, that someone's always taking someone else's place.
And how do you feel that resonates for you?
Well, I think it's really what happens in life, right? I mean, you're going, you're going to die, someone else will take your place.
Uh-huh.
And also in relationships. And
relationships.
happens a lot.
There are many troubling images in your poetry. You seem to have some phobias. I mean, they come through in certain poems. Spider bites,
Yeah.
sleeping rats, stream of the maze. You have an interest in, or you address the issue of abuse. Rush Hour, which is about an abused mother and her children riding a train.
Yes.
And then this poem that I found so powerful, Feral Girl Found in a Suburban House. I want you to read that. It's from an earlier collection.
Yes.
And it's about a child who's been held captive, I believe. Is that, I mean, I don't, again,
Yeah.
it's a very, I think, disturbing poem, but in its way, humorous. I mean, it has an element of humor there.
Well, if there's humor, it's the humor that she is getting out of, discovering these other people, and it's sort of, I don't think it's making fun of her, but I think it's her view of the world, and the world that she has been kept away from, and all of a sudden she's in it, and she can make these people do whatever she wants, in a way. Feral girl found in a suburban house. We know her by the two perfect sets of teeth that grew in like a shark's, one within the other. Or when we speak, the way she stares at a spot just over our shoulders that seems more forgiving. She is small and bent, as if prepared to spring. She'd been strapped for hours to the potty chair, a creature like herself, hugging the ground. The gods she invented must have squatted on their haunches. She doesn't feel heat. Her skin is moist and cool, like something taken from a wood. Locked in her closet, she played with two plastic raincoats, red and green, and learned to move sidewise like a beam of light. She came out spitting and scratching. Out of the noise surrounding her, birds, lawnmowers, thunder, she pulled the syllables for food, one long vowel, for no, a hiss that gives nothing away.
What elicited that poem?
I write about news stories or magazine stories a lot. And this was a very long, maybe a series of stories in the New Yorker about a feral girl. There's a movie called Casper Hauser that deals with the same sort of situation, a child kept away from civilization. And I guess I identified in the way that any child is uncivilized, and I certainly felt that way when I was a child. And she was, ultimately, she was treated kind of badly. She was taken away from her birth parents, who were the ones who treated her so strangely and kept her either in a closet or in a room, in a locked room. So she found herself with these psychiatrists or linguists who were studying her. And she wanted to go back to her mother, which she did for a while. And then she just went, I think when her mother died, sort of went off on her own. I'm not quite sure what happened to her. I think she died rather young, maybe in her 30s, but I'm not really sure. I don't remember exactly. But it was a situation I identified with in some way.
Mm. Well, what struck me about the poem is the way you do describe a kind of accommodation that she's found to this very narrow, strange world.
Yeah.
And it's poetic. I mean, it's frightening, but it is, I can't think of another word. There's something poetical about it. The raincoats and the moving sideways and so forth. It's a wonderful poem.
She had to sort of invent a world.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about what you think makes a writer? I know you teach creative writing as well as writing yourself. What do you tell your students? What words of wisdom would you give our audience about what's involved in being a poet?
I read a lot, and I read novels. You know, I read maybe 1 or 2 novels a week.
Really?
And I think it's to find out the way people speak. And I think that comes into the poems.
So listening and paying attention to language.
And reading. Sure, it's all language. And line breaks, you know, with poetry. When does your voice stop?
Uh-huh.
You know, when are you going to go around the way a typewriter does, you know, or a computer and get the next line, you know, to come in.
Yeah.
But I think you have to be very self-conscious about language.
Do you think writing can be taught, or to what extent do you think one can make a poet? Somebody who has some talent, to what extent do they need to be taught? Can they be helped by being taught?
I've known people who had no instruction and were wonderful poets, so I can't say that you always have to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it cuts out a lot of time, you know, to be able to learn from somebody else's mistakes. You know, I've had wonderful teachers. When I was an undergraduate, Jerry Stern, who was so enthusiastic about writing, and Louise Glick, who I admired so much and studied with.
Actually, your writing reminds me in certain ways of Louise Gluck's
Well, I
writing.
think it started out that way, but I think that I probably brought in more things than she would. She would probably want things to be perfect, and I'm not so sure that I want things to be perfect anymore.
I thank you very much for being here on the Drexel interview.
Thank you. I enjoyed it too.
And thank you for joining us for the Drexel interview.